I just want to start by thanking everybody who made this service possible today. It really, so many different pieces had to come together, and it really did take everybody's participation. Cindy Oakes, welcome. Hi, how are you? Some of you may be familiar with the term white privilege. Something I teach at my classes, and it just simply means that when you've been in power for 300 or 400 years, you get benefits, perks that get woven into the fabric of the country, of whatever that country is. If it were an African-American country, a black country in Africa, it might be black people who have black privilege. And white people have been in power in this country for 400 years. And I would really strongly say that what happened in Minneapolis would not have happened had the man been white. We don't hear about that happening to white people. But there's also other privileges. It's who's ever in power. Could somebody please mute? I'm hearing some.
I do really want to be writing.
Thank you, whoever it was. There's male privilege because men have been in power. And there are things that, and James Baldwin, the great black author, says, privilege, white privilege just means you never have to think about the fact you're white. If you're black, you think about it every day. And I did that in my classes. I asked the white students, said, when was the last time you thought about the fact you were white? I never think about I'm white, is what the students said. When I asked the people of color whether they were Hispanic or black, they said, I think about it every day of the week. And I asked them, when you see a police officer, what do you think? Every white hair went up, he's my friend, or she's my friend. And when I asked the blacks, they didn't have that same attitude. And one whose dad was a US Marshal, another father was a police officer, said, my dad sat me down when I was 8 or 10 years old and told me how to act when I saw a police officer. That's privilege. And there's male privilege. There's straight privilege. Just who's in power. Well, today I just want to talk briefly about a different privilege that came up last week. And I think there's something we can learn from it, and that is religious privilege. And we live in a Christian nation, and there's such a thing as Christian privilege. And it's one of the challenges that Jewish people have living in the diaspora. If you don't live in Israel, then you're going to be in a distinct minority. And the fact is that our nations and whatever the group is, organizationally, we live by a Christian calendar, a Christian way of thinking. So an example of this is a Supreme Court case. I just give you it was in the 1960s. Anybody from Philadelphia may be familiar with it. But there were Jewish clothing store shop owners on South Street. And they were closed for Shabbos. They were observant. But we're old enough, I think everyone here, to know what blue laws used to be. Sunday blue laws, right? Stores couldn't be open on Sunday. Well, Philadelphia had blue laws, and so they couldn't be open on Sunday. So they went to the Philadelphia City Council and they said, how about making an exception for us Orthodox Jews or observant Jews? We can't open our stores on Shabbos. We can't open our stores on Sunday. That's really the Christian Sabbath. What about letting us open up on Sunday? And they said, oh no, we can't do that. So they filed a lawsuit, went all the way to the US Supreme Court. And they claimed that having blue laws and keeping them from opening on Sunday, which is the Christian Sabbath, violated the Establishment of Religion Clause of the First Amendment. Our founding fathers were very careful about having a national religion. That's one of the reasons they left England. There was a national religion there. Supreme Court, quite disingenuously, said, well, this doesn't violate the statute of the First Amendment because Sunday is a Christian Sabbath, and it used to be the main reason, but now it's become a day of rest for everybody. And if we allow you to open up, you'll destroy that feeling of peacefulness. You don't have to even be Christian. You can be any religion, no religion. You still want Sunday to be your day of rest. And they wouldn't allow them to open up. And this is an example, because if the roles had been reversed, there's no question that they would have said, yes, you can open up. If it had been a Christian group and they couldn't open up. And I look at how ironic it is, because today, I don't think anybody under the age of 40 knows what a Sunday blue law is, because everything's open all the time today. There is no more day of rest or day of peace. So I remember as a child, and some of you may have gone through it also, to show you again that we are the minority and don't make the rules, is my parents loved that one night a week they were supposed to all be together was Friday night for dinner, Shabbos dinner. And then they wanted us to go to services, and then Saturday morning they just said, well, whatever. My basketball games, I worked hard to be on the basketball team, and they were on Friday night. I played football, and that was on Saturday morning. And boy, did we have some drag-out fights about that. And I don't know, I was going to ask, did any of you ever have any conflicts between Shabbos observance in your family and wanting to be some club, some activity, a music lesson, whatever it was that was only scheduled? Roberta, what was your challenge?
The elders answered, we are. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house blessing.
I wanted to do folk dancing on Friday night. My father used to chase me with the car, and my parents screamed at me, and they were like, it was horrible.
And again, when the schools, any public entity, or they just, hey, we don't schedule them Sunday morning because that's our Sabbath, but we don't even think about the fact that Friday night might be your Sabbath or Saturday might be your Sabbath. I used to coach my son's soccer teams and other sports. When do you think the games were? Saturday morning. No one said, so I think it's just ubiquitous. Wherever Jews are in this country, Basha, go ahead.
So I was big in sports also. And I played softball until I was almost in my 40s, late 30s. And I worked for United Synagogue. And they said, you couldn't play ball on Shabbos. I said, I can't play ball or I can't walk. I can't take transportation. They said, well, actually, you could play ball. You just can't get to the game. So when I was in my early 20s working for them, I would stay with somebody near the ball fields so I could, because we traveled all over the country. We did a lot all over the New England. And I'd call a synagogue and say, here's my story. Is there anybody who I could stay with Friday night and Saturday so I could just walk back and forth from the field? And so I did that for a while. And then if the game was someplace else, I just couldn't play in that game because I couldn't walk 4 miles to get there. But I would like to say one other thing, Rabbi, if I can. In Connecticut, I remember when I was little, those laws, and we had a store called Railroad Savage, and it was owned by a Jewish person. And he petitioned the state of Connecticut, and they let him open on Sunday. Nobody else was open, just him, and he was closed Friday night, Saturday.
Karen, you're nodding. Thank you,
And
Bob.
he made a killing.
And he made a killing, he did.
Oh, that's right. You're from New Haven.
We knew him. Oh, we knew him. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he made a killing, but they did a lot. And I don't know if it was because Governor Rivikoff, who was Jewish, was the governor at that time.
Yeah.
But he was the only store, and he made a killing. You had to park miles away to get to that store on Sunday.
That's great.
In New York, on the Lower East Side, even in the early 1900s, everything was closed on Saturday and open on Sunday. All the push carts, all the stores.
Okay, so everybody understands the issue. So one of the impetuses for making this my Devar Torah today is an article that I read, and it involved Shavuot. No president was more popular among the Jewish people than Abraham Lincoln. He was assassinated on April 14th, 1865. To honor his memory, President Andrew Johnson declared a day of humiliation and mourning. It was a beautiful concept, and he recommended that citizens across the country gather together in their respective houses of worship to mourn the loss of this great president. There was only one problem. They set the date for June 1st, 1865. Never bothering to think, should we check and see if that is in conflict with anybody's religious holiday? Yes, it was. It was on Shavuot, first day of Shavuot. Now the rabbis and congregations across the country were torn. Do we show our patriotism to our country and our love for President Lincoln? Or do we show our loyalty to our religion and our gratitude to God for the gift of Torah? Just going to ask, does anybody have a feeling what you would do in that situation? Anyone?
If you walk to shul, but it was on Shavuos, but you could make special extra prayers for Abraham Lincoln. You're going to shul anyway, and you're walking there.
I understand. All right. The problem is, and the rabbis, it's a good point, Ellen, but Shavuot was a joyous, happy holiday, and the rabbis did not want to transform that into a day of mourning and grieving, and that's what this day was supposed to be about. But they were torn. And again, I bring it up because it shows what I talk about Christian privilege. They weren't going to set it on Christmas Day. They weren't going to set it on Easter Day. They never even thought that this might be, there were Jews that might have a conflict. So it was not a big issue for the Reform movement because they'd already transformed the holiday of Shavuot into Confirmation Day. I don't know if any of you were ever involved or any, but Confirmation Day was in lieu of Bar Mitzvah. Back then, Reform temples did not have B'nai Mitzvah, and so there was Confirmation Day, and that was on Shavuot. So that was no issue. They could just move the day of the confirmation. There was no conservative movement, and I'd like to give little information. Does anybody know the history of when the conservative movement started? Now we should have an adult education on the conservative movement. Anybody know when the conservative movement started? John?
About 100 years ago, I think.
It was a spin-off from the Reform movement. The initial board of trustees, the Reform movement started with rabbis from Europe because there was a Reform movement in Europe. And then later came the rabbinical school. JTS was the conservative movement was a spin-off from the Reform movement. The initial board of trustees of JTS, that's what really started the conservative movement. In the early 1900s, Karen, you're right, about 100 years ago, they started JTS, and with most of the members being Reform. But they felt that the Reform movement had gone too far to the left, and they wanted something more in the middle between Orthodoxy and Reform. But so there was no conservative movement, that we didn't have to deal with it. So it was really just traditional Jews, many of whom were Sephardic. And so the big major synagogues, and just in the article that I was reading, Philadelphia's oldest synagogue was Mikveh Israel. The rabbi was Rabbi Sabato Morales. And again, I guess it was a Sephardic synagogue. And he took the view that it was more important that we honor Abe Lincoln and we be good Americans, and we should not have joyful emotions on that day. In New York City, Congregation Shearith Israel, which is still here, it's one of the oldest synagogues in the country, the Sephardic synagogue. The rabbi there was Jacques Judah Leon. And I have it backwards. It was Philadelphia said, no, you should put your religion first. Rabbi Leon was an ardent patriot who profoundly admired Lincoln. And he took the view that we should make it a day of mourning. So rabbis were torn, and no simple answer to it. But to me, it just epitomizes the challenge of being Jewish in this country when religion is important to people. We live in a secular world today. It's not that commonplace. But what came up was just when I came here, I mentioned it Monday night at a teaching, at whatever we had Monday night. Oh, it was the, what did we do Monday? What night this week that we had something. Tikkun, yeah, the Tikkun. Exactly. And I recalled when I came here, I'd worked with Habitat for Humanity before. And I came here and I went to Susanna Abbott, head of the Social Justice Committee. And I said, let's get involved with Habitat here. And we met with the head of Habitat, who couldn't have been lovelier. And she said, so we do bills on Wednesday and Saturday. And she had never even thought again about the fact that that might be the Jewish Sabbath. And we told her that we couldn't do it Saturday, but what about Sunday? I know that might interfere with theirs. She said, well, let me see if we have any, because they had to have some of their employees there for insurance reasons. And fortunately, she came back and said, yes, there are one or two people that don't go to church on Sunday, and they'll be glad to do that with you. But again, it hadn't entered their radar screen. And then what really provoked this, or the impetus for this, was what happened this past week. Because of the pandemic, a number of events in Boston have had to be canceled. And the Boston Marathon, for example, for the first time has been canceled. And so there's also the Gay Pride Parade. And that had to be canceled. So a number of local people, and it was going to be sponsored and starting at South Church, which is a wonderful progressive UCC church not far from here. They have a lovely minister. She's just a really gracious person. Decided that they were going to have a pride car parade so that people from different houses of worship would get in their cars and we would go to different, just drive a certain route. And that would be the Gay Pride Parade for this area. What a wonderful thing is to honor the LGBTQ plus community. There was only one problem again. The date they set was Saturday, June 13th. Again, this is a wonderful minister, a really wonderful church. And it came up this past week. I don't know, some of you saw how we responded to it and let them know that we'd love to participate, but we can't because it's on Shabbos. And again, to their credit, they decided and they moved the date to a weekday the following week. So anybody that has some time and you'd like to show your support for the LGBTQ plus community, it'll be, I think, a nice way to say we honor you and support you. But it just shows, again, the Hobson's choice. With our forebears, we're confronted with 300 years ago, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, and we still do. People are just not aware. And again, whether it's white privilege, male privilege, straight privilege.
So is the pride parade happening, car parade happening?
Anybody need to mute? I'm hearing, I just don't want to hear something personal, of a personal nature is why I don't want the person to. Okay, so I want to put this together because it's something really important that I'm not sure how much we Jews know this. And these figures I'm going to give you are the best estimate.
Yeah, they sent out all the congregations and all the churches to participate in this parade.
Who is not muted? Everybody's muted. I wonder where it's coming from. John, can you mute everybody?
Everyone is muted.
Okay, thank you.
They've been muted.
Okay, well, okay. Can you hear what I'm hearing or not? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to give you some figures And it's something that I hope we take from this religious privilege that comes in. In the 1st century CE, talking about 2,000 years ago, how many Jewish people do you think there were in the world? The best estimate. No one knows for sure. How many Jews do you think there were in the world in the 1st century CE? Bill, anybody want to take a stab?
5 million.
You hit the nail on the head. 5 million. How'd you know that? That's right.
I did. I didn't.
Okay.
But I was going to say I Googled it, but
That's the best estimate, 5 million Jews. The world population was less than 1% of what it is today. Shortly after that 1st century, the Jewish population decreased greatly. You had the destruction of the temple and the razing of Jerusalem. The Bar Kokhba revolution in the 130 CE was a failure. Tens of thousands of Jews were killed. And what's amazing is that over the next 1,700 years, the Jewish population, as a result of expulsions, wars, murders, epidemics, voluntary and forced conversions, the hostility of the Christian and Muslim worlds, the Jewish population never again got up to 2 million Jews. That's pretty amazing. There were never more than 2 million Jews in the world for 1,700 years. Which means that most Jews were not just killed, they converted. They stopped practicing Judaism, whatever it was. It was too onerous to be Jewish. There were too many obstacles set in your path. In the beginning of the 18th century, mainly in Central Europe, Russia, Poland, Germany, the Jewish population started increasing. And it went from never more than 2 million to approximately 17 million. Still a small percentage of the world population. And then what happens in the 1900s? We have Nazi Germany and the Shoah, and the 17 million approximately is now down to 11 million. 6 million Jews killed. And now we're in the year 2020, 75 years after the end of World War II. And tragically, we have never come back to pre-World War II numbers. The estimate now is approximately 15 million, 16 at the most. We had more than that, again, before World War II. And of these 15 to 16 million, to show you how stark the figures are, almost 7 million live in Israel. Almost 6 million now live in the United States. So you've got 12 to 13 million of this 15 or 16 million living in 2 places, which means there's approximately 3 million Jews for the rest of the 6 billion people living in the world. And if you take away Germany and France and Canada, you're down to like 1.5 million or something. Why did I give you these numbers? Because we all going to have to make choices about our Jewish heritage. We're going to have choices. Do I go play basketball, or do I, like I did, or played softball like Basha? Am I going to go do this thing on Shabbos, even though it's worthwhile, instead of going to services or staying part of my tradition? And I just wanted to point out, it really hit me, that there's no guarantees we're going to be around 100 years from now. Sobering thought. And I'm not an alarmist in any way. We've made it for 3,000 years. Why shouldn't we make it for another 100? because we live in the most secular world, and you get more with honey than with vinegar, and we were forced to be in ghettos, we stuck together. But as Jean-Paul Sartre said, what's going to happen to the Jewish people when they no longer have to live in ghettos? So hopefully and I see it with my children, the younger generation, it's hard to be Jewish. So a couple of the gleanings from all this. We've been left an incredible legacy by our ancestors, a legacy that should never be taken lightly. And while they were able to withstand all kind of adversity, the Shoah, other things, and they survived, let us do our part to make sure that we leave our legacy for our children and the next generations. And the other thing is, while we are religiously a disadvantaged group, it's the term for it, we're a distinct minority. In other areas, we're the advantaged groups, we're in the majority. If we're men, we have male privilege. All the people I see out there have white privilege. And the second lesson I wanted to take from this is that we never lose empathy and compassion for those that don't have white privilege, that don't have male privilege, that don't have all the other straight privilege, and that we remember that there are those that we need to be sensitive to and have compassion for, so that we don't set dates. I'm using that metaphorically. So that we don't set dates that are convenient for us, but put somebody else in a real difficult situation. Shabbat Shalom to everybody, and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
We turn to page 183.